Your book does a great job, especially in the beginning, about fundamentally laying down the functions of a bank, a store, a warehouse, as well as a venture capital outfit. And when you combine the two, especially when the government backs it, you're asking for trouble, which is why I think that banks ought to have to buy private insurance if you don't get back to some other system instead of federal insurance. That's a huge problem. Right. But I actually think the monetary policy in general, Congressman Paul, and I am sympathetic to your argument, obviously, but I think it's a lack of political will. It's kind of like a manifestation of a nation that has lost a lot of self-reliance and a lot of intellectual and personal fortitude. By that, I mean, one of the reasons the politicians wanted to go off the gold standard is because it was easy. It was easy to inflate. It was easy to fund government programs, as you point out in the book. But the same is true for a monetary policy. If you adopted John Taylor's rule, or go back to Friedman and a hard monetary rule where velocity would be the only swaying thing, which wouldn't be a whole lot different than fluctuations in the price of gold. If you could get the political authorities to be firm and disciplined on that, that would work too, it seems to me.
Yeah, but you can't trust the politicians. They've never been trustworthy, and that's why we're in this mess. So Milton Friedman and I used to debate this issue. And he always conceded to it that an honest-to-God gold standard would be okay, the kind that I believed in.
Yeah, right.
Because you can't trust the government because they'll do what they did do.
Right.
But the important thing that Murray Rothbard talked about was making sure it was a gold coin standard, that if you have paper, that you always can vote immediately by walking into the bank and you want to see if you got your gold coin.
Right.
So it can't be a gold bullion standard. It has to be in coinage. And I don't know why, these ETFs now are getting so huge. If some people are skeptical of that, do they always have the gold there? But what if you do have some ETFs and they started issuing certificates against them, and they were willing to have the public audits, and they did have the gold, and they would always send you the gold every time you turn it in? All of a sudden, you would have certificates that would be maintained.
How many currencies are you talking? You're talking about 100% private banking. How many currencies do you want?
That's the ideal. Of course, in the Constitution, we still have the responsibility and authority to issue gold coins, right. Gold and silver coins as legal tender, and no authority to have a central bank and print money. But you still could have private banking. But
let me see. I'm up against the clock, Paul.
They're fraudulent. They will cause the same problem.
I'm up against the clock. And when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about your book, In the Fed, and then some other topics as well with Congressman Paul. But let me see if I can't. And you're absolutely right, of course, about Friedman. He used to say that you could have a floating rate, or you could have a hard fixed rate, as you described, but you could never have a pegged rate with an activist central bank, which is, why we have these currency runs and these reserve raids and all of this nonsense. You're right about that. But let me see if I can get you to concede real quick here before we break the first time. If you had a hard and fast rule that Friedman espoused, or now John Taylor, that said the monetary authorities will not, and they abided by it, will not grow the money supply more than 2-3%, whatever the rule would be, would it work?
It probably would work better than what we have.
Right.
But Mises still argues even if you have 1%, you're going to have distortions that will build up over time and then have to require correction. You want a free market balance of supply and demand. So it wouldn't be as bad. He always said the bubbles would be less huge by doing this. But but then it's back to human nature. If they're allowed to print at 3%, then you have a crisis come and
well, you're right. That's the political problem, right?
Then there's the incentive, and then they give up, and the hard and fast rule is no longer hard and fast.
No, you're right. The first thing we should do would be repeal Humphrey Hawkins and then pass your bill to audit the Fed. I'm all for those two provisions. Those would be good starts anyway. Hold that thought. Representative Ron Paul is our guest. We'll come back and talk about a few other things as well with the congressman from the great state of Texas on the Jason Lewis Show. The book is called In the Fed by Congressman Ron Paul. There are a number of people who have endorsed the book, not the least of which Arlo Guthrie. Rarely has a single book not only challenged but decisively changed my mind. The congressman coming off his presidential campaign of 2008 with this book. I think it is timely, and not to mention some constitutional issues about all of this, such as health reform, which in addition to being horrible economics is patently unconstitutional unless you believe in an ever-expanding, elastic interstate commerce clause. We really do have a crisis in the country, and at this time, Congressman Paul, it seems to me you need a credible opposition party. Is there one?
Well, there is one, I believe, but it's not well enough known to be, a viable party to really compete. And I don't think another party, a third or a fourth or a fifth party, can compete under the rules today. I think the people are demanding it, but when the time comes to vote, they don't hear about the other ones. The third-party system they can't get on the ballots. They don't get into the debates. It's a very, very undemocratic process that we have. We go and die to spread democracy around the world, and democracy does not thrive here, especially, what if you come to the conclusion that the policies really aren't any different between the Republican and Democrat? Where does the independent go, or where does a third-party person go when you can't even get on the ballots? I mean, it is rather sad, and I think is why people are resorting to anger right now rather than resolution of saying, I can solve this problem.
There doesn't seem to be any thinking within the parties. The Democrats are just quite, I hate to be so blunt, and you can't be this given the rules of being a gentleman on the House floor and elsewhere, but the Democrats are just socialists. They really are, and there's very, very little doubt in my mind about that. But the Republicans are not only not much better, but they're growing increasingly intolerant of any sort of divergence in their views. Ronald Reagan, in an interview in 1975 in Reason magazine, said the heart and soul of conservatism is libertarianism. But you can't be a libertarian in the Republican Party. You got kicked out of the party for all practical means and purposes for defying the orthodoxy on Iraq.
That's right. They're very open to a liberal moderate. You can, and really lean left, and they'll go out of their way to support you. Oh, well, we have to have an open door for, a broad-based party. But if you are libertarian and if you're a constitutionalist and you point out the infractions of the Republican Party, then you've overstepped your bounds. Because I think the reason is the more libertarian constitutional approach is saying what the Republican Party claims they are. They say, "Oh, we're for personal liberty, and we're for balanced budget. We're for minding our own business." Then when you say, "Well, why don't you vote that way?" then they don't want to hear that, and then then they resent it.
Yeah, we could have dismantled Fannie and Freddie with a majority president and a majority party. Could have done that long ago. Did not.
Early in this decade, I introduced legislation just to remove the line of credit to the Fed. Legislation said, no, if you keep doing this, you're going to have a major housing crisis. But they wouldn't consider that for 1 minute. What happened after Enron? We passed Sarbanes-Oxley.
Right.
Dozens and dozens of businesses overseas by just more regulation. And the Democrats, that's why there really isn't any difference. Monetary policy, foreign policy, and domestic welfare policy really remains the same. We didn't slow it up. We passed prescription drug program. We doubled the size of the Department of Education. That's not what Ronald Reagan talked about. He wanted to get rid of the Department of Education, but we don't even talk about that anymore.
And that's why there's a real.
You say that now.
That's why there's a crisis right now. There is no fundamental opposition. There's angst to the Democrats, but there is no credible opposition right now. And boy, I tell you, it's hard to see a vision down the road that, where someone really stands up. Now, a lot of people are talking about Ron Paul still running again. Would you entertain a run? It doesn't sound like it, as a third-party ticket in 2012?
No, it seems like a long way off, and I think it depends on a lot of things. I'm up for re-election next year, and I don't know what's going to happen for a year or two. You could have a slight reprieve on this, or you could have a dollar crisis starting next month. If we're in the midst of a dollar crisis,
quickly,
no matter where we are, I'm going to want to speak out on it.
All right. Congressman Ron Paul, keep us posted, and good luck on the book.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Glad to have you. Very interesting guy. Don't have to agree with everything, but he's got something important to say. Ron Paul on the Jason Lewis Show.